Lovely day, isn't it? One of the greatest things in life that we often take for granted is the blue sky. Yes, a blue sky like the one there is the best time to go outside, touch grass, and explore the world. But there is another definition that makes the blue sky a wonderful thing. It is a term that is also used to describe limitless possibilities, to think about an extravagant idea or concept without having to worry about the reality of how to bring that to life. That is why, in the creative process, the first step is often considered to be the blue sky phase. But what if you had a studio that is dedicated to honoring that part of the process? A studio that sees every blue sky idea and treat it like an acorn that they could plant and later grow into something much bigger. Well, there was one that made quite a name for itself back in the 2000s and 2010s, where its legacy may be limited, but they were able to produce some of the biggest and even some of the most groundbreaking works of animation in the 21st century. As an animation fan, that's why the third thing that comes to mind when I hear the word blue sky is the animation studio that is aptly called Blue Sky Studios. Now for this look back, we'll be going through the whole history of the studio from their beginnings during the dawn of CG, to their prime as Fox's signature feature animation studio, to their unfortunate end during the pandemic, and even the anarchy that happened afterwards. It's a story where it could get cold at certain points, but it does also stop to smell the roses and take flight to bring us some epic movies filled with whimsical worlds, colorful characters, and some familiar faces that were all made with impressive technology and chaotic talent. We're not just looking back at this, we're also looking up. Welcome to Animation Look Back, Blue Sky Studios. Now let's begin in Elmsford, New York with a company named Magi. In 1966, Dr. Philip Middleman founded one of the earliest computer graphics companies named the Mathematical Applications Group, Inc., or Magi. Under government contracts, their purpose was to develop software meant to measure rays of nuclear radiation, including one that replicated the laws of physics called synthovision.
Computer Visual presents a new way to create pictures, synthovision.
Fast forwarding to the late 1970s, a young undergrad named Chris Wedge got a job at Magi and met one of the company's key engineers, Dr. Eugene Trubetskoy, noted as one of the world's first CG animators and has a PhD in theoretical physics from Columbia University. Now, it's important to note that Wedge was not there to be a physician. His background was actually in film and animation, where he was making his own stop-motion cartoons while he was still in school. And at the time, he was studying to get his BFA in film from the State University of New York at Purchase. While the technology was still relatively new and had many limitations, Wedge was a key player in taking Magi's software and apply his film and animation background to create commercials for television. As a result, it helped the company to strengthen their business by going beyond their original governmental purpose. So much so that it even got the attention of Disney and resulted them in hiring Magi as one of the 4 studios to make the computer graphics of their 1982 feature, Tron. Thanks to synthovision being more advanced at the time by being capable of animating fluid animation with the 3D objects, the company ended up contributing to 15 of the 20 minutes worth of CG made for the feature, including the famous light cycle scenes.
One of the reasons we asked Magi Synthovision to do the light cycles specifically is that the design by Sid Mead of the light cycles was such that you could take these basic geometric shapes and slice them and dice them and kind of put them back together again, and you came up with a light cycle that was really pretty cool and pretty incredible. And coming off a design of Sid Mead, it looked bang. It looked exactly like it.
While the tools they had were capable of bringing the grid to life, they did have to bring on board some additional help to perfectly capture the film's look. including Michael Ferrero, a system architect who made virtual reality simulations for the US Navy, and Carl Ludwig, an electrical engineer who worked on the lunar module for NASA. On a side note, this wouldn't be the only time that Magi collaborated with Disney. Soon after Tron, they created an animation test based on Maurice Sendak's book Where the Wild Things Are, where the team developed the 3D backgrounds and digitally painted the characters, while the hand-drawn animation and the directing of the tests were done by then Disney animators Glenn Keane and John Lasseter.
This is the vector test for Where the Wild Things Are, which Magi Synthavision did for Disney Studios. Once the vector test is approved, the real work begins. Each piece of vector animation must be modeled and shaped. In this case, the characters were painted by computer.
However, it wasn't long afterwards when the company was struggling to stay afloat. And even when they brought on board CBS and Fox Video marketing executive David Brown and managing producer Alison Brown, it wasn't enough to pull itself together. And in the mid-1980s, Magi was gone for good after it was sold to VidMax. But while they lost their company, their passion of turning that technology into computer animation was still strong. So much so that Wedge went to get his master's at the Ohio State University to learn how he could combine computer programming with animation. And so, on February 1987, the 6 former colleagues that comprised of Chris Wedge, Eugene Trubetskoy, Michael Ferrero, Carl Ludwig, David Brown, and Alison Brown teamed up to create their own computer graphics studio that they called Blue Sky Studios. And in order for them to stand out against the competition, they had a mission to revolutionize the industry with one simple trick. You see, during that time, it required an entire team in order to manually create the light and shadow effects of computer animation, and even back then, they didn't look good. That was why, with the software they made that's like their own version of Synthavision called CGI Studio, their goal was to develop software that could not only create lighting automatically, but to also have them look as realistic as possible, regardless of what material that the digital light was reflecting on. And with their newfound studio, equipped with only 3 computers in a little office, their beginnings were not good. In fact, they started off by making no business whatsoever. But it wasn't their fault though. Everybody was going through some hard times due to the stock market crash of '87. In the meantime, the team was working on strengthening CGI Studio and developed a ray tracer that calculated the location of the light source, the objects that the light is shining on, and what the camera is seeing. And after creating an image of a glass of wine with a chrome ball, their dream of digitally recreating realistic lighting finally became real. It wasn't until 1989 when they got their first customer, who asked to have their logo be in front of a sunset and flying over the ocean. The result was a mixed experience for the studio due to the fact that it took 2.5 days to render that one single image. On one hand, they were able to get the job done and the client was happy with it. Then again, this highlighted how their 3 computers alone did not have the power to create actual computer animation. And when you have an animation studio that doesn't have the resources to produce animation, that's a problem. That was when they asked for the help of a local graphics studio and teamed up with them so that they could have the extra computer processors needed. But in the end, that one job was the first step they needed to get their business going. And in the early 1990s, they were starting to build their reputation by producing bumpers for Nickelodeon and MTV, and over 200 commercials for companies like Bell Atlantic, now called Verizon, Chrysler, Chock full of Nuts, General Foods, Pepsi, several pharmaceuticals, and many more. Other noteworthy ads they did include the first CG M&M's commercial, and one for Braun that got them a Clio Award for advertising. A few years later, MTV asked them to work on a bigger project for them, which was to animate cockroaches for their 1996 movie, Joe's Apartment. This This opened the door for the studio to produce character animation for more movies and series, and to be acquired by the 20th Century Fox-owned Very Imaginative Pictures Inc., or VIFX, in 1997. And from there, they got to create the CG for films like A Simple Wish, Alien Resurrection, Mouse Hunt, Star Trek Insurrection, Fight Club, and the Season 2 finale of The Sopranos.
Lost a lot of weight.
Swimming. The best exercise. Works every muscle group.
Get the out of here. You never exercised once in your life.
But as their CG craftsmanship became more prominent, they were simultaneously working on a special project that was meant to present the full capabilities of their technology. One that marked the beginning of their legacy as a big-name animation studio. And it was a short that was simply titled Bunny. It's about an old widowed female rabbit trying to make a cake, but constantly gets interrupted by an annoying moth. But as the short reveals more about her past and her challenge of getting rid of the bug, the bunny went to sleep and the moth returns not to have another round at that light bulb, but to help her move to the afterlife. The idea of the short went all the way back in 1990, when it was meant to exhibit what they could do with CGI Studio by telling a story with computer animation. However, because it was primarily Wedge's personal project, it could only be produced during the off hours of the studio, and from time to time, when someone at Blue Sky didn't have either a commercial or a movie to fully work on, they contributed on Bunny to move the production a bit forward. However, when the short was in the early stages, Wedge also worked as an instructor teaching animation at New York City School of Visual Arts, which was where he met his star pupil at the academy, Carlos Saldanha. Born in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, Saldanha moved to Manhattan to study computer animation. And with his passion for the medium as his motivation, his teachers noticed how he was a great talent, especially when Saldanha created 2 shorts that were showcased across several film festivals. And once he graduated in 1993, Chris brought Carlos on board at Blue Sky. It wouldn't be until 1996 when producer Nina Rappaport saw the potential of Bunny and how it can showcase the studio's capabilities, tasking Wedge to fully work on the short and give him 2 years to finish. It was a time where they could really put CGI Studio to the test, as the cartoon demanded for not just different kinds of lights from the swinging lamp to the ethereal cloudscape, but to also have them shine on a variety of surfaces like the fur on the bunny and the moth, the glass on her glasses, and the metal on her utensils and appliances. This was where Carl Ludwig got to experiment more with the software and try out one of the features called Radiosity, which was part of the ray tracer that can determine both the light source itself and the type of object that the light reflects on so that it could render realistic color highlights and shadows. And after those 2 years of creating the bittersweet tale, along with getting Kathleen Brennan and Tom Waits to compose the music, Wedge's passion project was complete and was released on November 2nd, 1998. Soon afterwards, the short was celebrated by audiences and the entire film industry, where it not only won the Golden Nika at the Pre-Ars Electronica, but also went on to win the Oscar for Best Animated Short.
This award is especially thrilling because it's been a labor of love, Bunny, for all of us at Blue Sky Studios in New York for many years, actually. And so to my beautiful wife and family, Jean, Sarah, and Jack, Mom and Dad, Nina Rappaport, my producer, Tom Waits and Kathleen Brennan for their soulful music, and every one of you that is now or ever has been a member of Blue Sky Studios. Thank you all very much for helping me follow my heart and for pouring so much of yours into Bunny. Thank you.
As a result, their major award got the full attention of Fox, who already worked with Blue Sky on Alien Resurrection and was still collaborating with them at the time on films like Fight Club and Titan AE. But the next movie they requested them to get into was their biggest test yet, as this wouldn't be to apply some CG onto an already made movie. It was to fully produce their first animated feature. And the picture for this task was called Ice Age. It's the story of a lone woolly mammoth named Manny, whom on his solo migration rescued a dim-witted yet very extroverted ground sloth named Sid. As the two pair up to go on their own path, much to the annoyance of Manny wishing to be alone, they encountered a human mother and were given her baby named Roshan, since he is being hunted by Smilodons wanting revenge on the humans for taking down half of the pack. One of these saber-toothed tigers, Diego, is assigned with bringing the baby to his leader, Soto, and managed to trick the two newly assigned baby carriers in joining their journey, hoping to accomplish his mission and bring his pack the bonus of a big meal with Manny. So now that they're on the move and traveling through treacherous terrain, the three must get used to each other so that they could work together to bring Roshan back to his tribe. The idea for this movie began all the way back in 1997, when producer Lori Forte was at Fox Animation Studios and proposed a film set in an era that no other feature had done before, the Ice Age period. And to help further elaborate this concept, she brought in two writers to build its core, including Michael J. Wilson to create the oddball trio and a few other characters like Soto, and Michael Berg to establish the tone. However, the original plan was to make the picture with hand-drawn animation, and it would have been directed by Fox's signature directors at the time, Don Bluth and Gary Goldman, since they were about to finish their first feature with the company, Anastasia. It wasn't until production executive Kevin Bannerman and then head of Fox Animation, Chris Meledandri, convinced Forte that the movie should be made with computer animation instead, especially when the company just got a new CG studio under their wing. When Blue Sky was brought on board to create Ice Age with Chris Wedge set as the director and moved to their new location in White Plains, New York, the team set off to bring back the Ice Age by doing extensive research at the American Museum of Natural History, and had two artists develop the world that the feature is set in, including illustrator Peter Desev to design all the prehistoric animals, and artist Peter Clark to create the environment around the characters. They were committed to stay authentically true to the period, and they got the approval of anthropologists to do whatever they want. All they asked for in return was just not to have any dinosaurs in the movie. Well, that one doesn't count. Originally, the film's tone was supposed to be like a dramedy with plenty of action. But when Blue Sky was set to make the film, Wedge worked with the writers to change it up so that it could be a lot more comedy-oriented, even later bringing in screenwriter Peter Ackerman and former Simpsons writers John Vitti and Mike Reiss to make the script funnier. This resulted in some significant changes that later ultimately defined the movie and the franchise. In the first draft of the script, the film was supposed to open with a nightmare sequence where we would have seen what happened to Manny's family, and then he wakes up to find the animals migrating during the fall. While Manny's backstory stayed in the final film by being presented much later near the end of the second act, Chris did not like that intro because it didn't establish a good first impression of what this movie was going to be about. He suggested to replace that with a scenario where a small character was comically being challenged by the Ice Age itself, as a way to immediately give audiences what they were expecting from an animated movie set in the Ice Age, and establish the feature's overall tone. The only catch with this concept was to figure out who would be this tiny character getting pushed around by the period. As the director was looking through Desev's sketches, he noticed a drawing that caught his attention. A bug-eyed rodent with saber teeth. And that was when he shouted, "That's him!"
We thought, well, what's the best way to give the Ice Age a present? Let's set it against one of the animals you might find there. So we came up with this hapless, saber-toothed squirrel that's just trying to bury his nut like all squirrels do for the winter.
So with their new character in place, Wedge left Disney veteran Bill Frake to storyboard the new opening. And while he was working in his rental home, the little guy's personality was inspired by a wild squirrel who came to the house demanding peanuts, and would go crazy if he didn't get one. As a result, with the help of Wilson's daughter Flora, who combined the words squirrel and rat to give him the name Scrat, and making an acorn his prized possession, Frake developed this cartoon plot where he tries to just eat the acorn, but nature wouldn't allow him, where literally every attempt he tries just fails in ways that are either small inconveniences or catastrophic disasters. They also once thought about having him talk, but they instead made him a silent character, with the director doing the sounds of his reactions. Also, Scred was supposed to just appear in the first scene, but after getting a strong reception from test audiences and great reactions from the first trailer that only showed the opening sequence, the team later added more Scrat scenes as a way to counterbalance the more dramatic moments with his comedic antics.
Pack of lies, pack of troubles, pack of wallops, pack of birds, pack of flying fish.
When it came to developing Sid, the team always knew that they wanted to have John Leguizamo to be the voice. But the problem was to figure out what kind of voice does Sid have. While he was on the set of Moulin Rouge, Leguizamo experimented with dozens of different types of voices to see which would suit the design best, trying to avoid the slow talk that is commonly associated with sloth characters.
Look, some promises are no big deal. I mean, believe me, I know. I promised my parents I would try working once in a while. Well, I promised my first girlfriend we'd mate for life. I promised myself that I would lose 20 pounds by New Year's. But a deathbed promise, you gotta take a little serious, okay?
It wasn't until he watched a nature documentary about giant sloths where he learned that they store food in their mouths. With that in mind, he created a voice with that attribute. And that was when he added that distinct lisp that defined Sid's true voice.
Look, some promises are no big deal. Believe me, I know. I promised my parents I would try working once in a while. I promised my first girlfriend that we would mate for life. I promised myself I'd lose 20 pounds by New Year's. But a deathbed promise, oh man.
But the character wasn't complete yet. Throughout the production, his personality went through several changes, even if some scenes that feature who he used to be were fully animated. At one point, Sid was considered to be a con artist, even introducing himself in the film by swindling some young aardvarks of their berries. He would have also had this Pepe Le Pew-style running gag where he was continuously chased around by this female sloth named Sylvia, voiced by Kristen Johnston, who was madly in love with Sid.
Why? Doesn't anyone love me?
Sydney?
Anyone but her!
However, as far as those ideas went during the making of the film, they were both scrapped in favor of the character being both clumsy and stupid so that he could be more likable. Of course, animating an entire movie like Ice Age was a major challenge for the team at Blue Sky, and it came with its own set of unique obstacles. For the overall visual aesthetic, the team took inspiration from the Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner cartoons to find that balance of giving the cast the main focus while on these giant backgrounds that were built to support the story and the gags, along with filling the world with the weirder looking animals during that time and stylizing them up a bit to further sell the idea of how the period was vastly different to the one we live in now. As for the characters, there were some that gave the animators more creative freedom, especially with their comedic possibilities like Scrat and Sid, but there were also those like the humans and the saber-toothed tigers like Diego who were tougher to animate because they had to stay true to their anatomy, especially when the team wanted to maintain an element of realism onto the picture, and the easiest to identify in Ice Age if their movements don't feel right were the people and the big cats. And then there was Manny, whom despite being one of the main characters, has all that fur on his body, no hands, and most of his face is obstructed by his tusks and trunk. This was why the animators emphasized the mammoth's eyes for his performance, especially when he had some of the most emotional scenes of the picture.
You know, the best references are our own faces.
Yeah.
That's where thumbnailing comes in handy. You can just draw out different little facial, cartoon Manny heads and draw out different expressions.
However, as the team was working on bringing the period back to life, the pressure for its success gradually grew higher. In 1999, as the visual effects market was facing hard times, Fox sold VIFX to Rhythm and Hughes, and a year later, they were considering to do the same with Blue Sky. Ice Age wasn't just to prove to the company that they were capable of making computer animated features for them, but to also show that the studio was not worth selling away.
You have to trust me. Trust you? Why in the world would we trust you? Because I'm your only chance.
And after 4 years of animating the trio's journey, Ice Age was finally complete and released in theaters on March 15th, 2002. While critics weren't as amazed by it like they were with other computer animated films that came out prior, like Pixar's Monsters, Inc. and DreamWorks' Shrek, most were still positive towards the feature and said that there was enough charm and humor to make it enjoyable. But when it came to the box office, despite its setting being cold, it was the hottest movie of that spring, reaching to the top on its domestic opening weekend with $46.3 million. And throughout its theatrical performance, Ice Age made $176.4 million domestically and earned a worldwide total of almost $383 million, making it the highest-grossing animated feature of that year. The movie also got them 4 nominations at the Annie Awards and brought Blue Sky back to the Oscars, where it was nominated for Best Animated Feature. But the award went to Hayao Miyazaki's Spirited Away. Soon after the release, when the film came out on VHS and DVD, it was accompanied by an animated spin-off short based on the ideas they didn't use in the movie, and directed by the film's co-director Carlos Saldana, named Gone Nutty, where Scrat tries to keep his collection of acorns after they all escape from his tree. And that received an Oscar nomination for Best Animated Short. But just like Scrat's attempt to get that acorn, the cartoon also missed the trophy, as that was given to Adam Elliott's Harvey Crumpet. But even with all the box office earnings and Oscar nominations, the biggest accomplishment that Ice Age did was establishing Blue Sky as the next major computer animation studio alongside Pixar and DreamWorks, giving them a strong start to showcase the true potential of what they could do with computer animation and present their contribution to how it can be used as a storytelling medium for feature films. Sid, Manny, Diego, and Scrat may have been responsible for the studio's solid big screen debut, but that was only the beginning for both Blue Sky and Ice Age. After they finished their first movie and proved their worth, Blue Sky gained the trust of Fox that they were capable of producing animated hits. By that point, the company was aware that Chris Wedge had another idea for a feature for quite some time. So after the success of Ice Age and the team had no other plans for their next picture, that was when the executives told Wedge that he could go and start the production of Robots. In a world that is entirely populated by robots, the film centers around the adventure of Rodney Copperbottom, an aspiring inventor who traveled to Robot City with his invention Wonderbot in the hopes to work for his idol's company, Big Weld Industries, to pay his father's debt. However, it turns out that things have drastically changed there since a more corporate-minded robot named Ratchet took over and stopped production on helping lower-class bots with inventions and parts in favor of making luxurious upgrades. But during his time in the city, he meets an oddball robot named Fender, and he brings Rodney to his ragtag group of outmodes called the Rusties. And as they band together to help their neighborhood, the gang slowly discovers that the city's core problem is caused by the corruption of Ratchet and his mother, Madame Gasket, leading to the class war of Rodney and the citizens of Robot City versus Ratchet and Gasket's secret empire. Back when Blue Sky was still making Ice Age, Wedge got an opportunity to collaborate with author and illustrator William Joyce. They first met when John Lasseter recommended the author to meet the director after Joyce worked as a concept designer at Pixar. The original project that the two were meant to create was an animated movie adaptation of Joyce's 1993 book, Santa Calls, for Fox. The project ended up going nowhere, but the two still stayed in touch. It wasn't until they were at a Louisiana party where they went on a canoe ride and got stranded in the fog that they developed the idea of a movie about robots, since the two were fans of those types of machines, and thought about deviating from the typical humanity versus the machines narrative by replacing it with something more lighthearted and fun, where it is set in a unique world where everyone and almost everything is a sentient robot. In that moment, they were able to brainstorm a lot of what they wanted to do for this film, especially when Robot's first purpose was to make Wedge and Joyce forget that they were lost in canoes and don't know how to find their way out.
Just stick with me, kid. I know this town like the back of my hand. Hey, that's new.
But once they were able to get back on land, they started the project by making a proof of concept short to present how an animated movie starring robots can be made, and a diorama made out of old machines from a junk shop to give the team an example of what a city in this world would look like. As Wedge was, again, set as the director, Joyce was on board as both the producer and the film's only production designer. However, the role of the art director was given to a CG artist that Chris knew while he was studying for his master's at Ohio State University named Steve Martino. Speaking of those designs, the goal of creating their robot world was to avoid the typical expectation of some space-age Jetsons-like future where everything has a sleek look. Instead, they wanted to emphasize the inner mechanics of a machine, showing off all the cogs and gears that make those contraptions function, no matter how big or small they are. The team also had to learn how to adapt to the style of William Joyce, noticing that there was a general round aesthetic to his designs where the prominent use of circles makes his works welcoming in a kid-friendly way. Not to mention how the team added a bit of their own sense of that childlike whimsy, like how they made the city's commune feel like carnival rides with the Crosstown Express. There is also something in his art that is referred to as a big little tiny rhythm. Steve Martino described this by saying, if you look at his illustrations, he's got a wonderful way of leading the eye. He'll always leave a very giant shape as a restful place in the composition. That's the big. Then there's the little, something that gives you a little more detail. And then there's the tiny, some textural element, which is a fine, minuscule detail that informs your understanding of the scale of that big, quiet area. One little detail down at the bottom tells you that all the gearworks you understood to be small are actually enormous. Staying true to that rhythm was a challenge for the studio, especially when their resources and time were not on their side. But the team was still committed to ensure that those tiny details remain to help elevate the big picture. In order to make Robot City feel like a place that is growing and rich with history, the animators incorporated layers of different time periods that reflect both the area and the characters. First, deep within the buildings, is the Industrial Revolution, where cast iron is being held together by rivets, and smoke is continuously coming out of them like Madame Gasket and her chop shop.
All right, break time's over. Chop chop.
Then there's the internal combustion, which is where the working class of the city resides, and where Rodney came from in Rivet Town that feel like they came from the mid-20th century. There was a time when their style was all the rage, where the metal was painted in very vibrant colors and having replacement parts was quite common. However, their prime has long passed, shown by their rust and chipped paint, and the difficulty of adapting to modern times as spare parts are becoming increasingly scarce.
Here we are. Home sweet home. What's mine is yours. Oh dear.
And finally, there's the electronic age, reserved only for the highest-ranking members of Robot City, where they have a modern design that hides their inner mechanics with aluminum alloy, whose aesthetic was inspired by one of the most high-tech gadgets of the era, a Shimano fishing reel.
There's a great, big, beautiful tomorrow.
As for the creation of the characters, that turned out to be a very mixed experience, a little similar to what the animators had to go through with Ice Age. The Rusties were easy for Joyce to design, as they each only took a day to capture their final look. But for the main characters, they were a lot harder to get right. There were many attempts to build Rodney, and found some inspiration from a Volkswagen minibus and an Evinrude outboard motor that belonged to Wedge's grandfather, especially when they both have that white and teal color palette that they later used on the protagonist. But the real trick was to find that careful balance between looking like a movie star, but not look too heroic at the same time. It wasn't until Peter DeSev took a shot at it and developed a Rodney Copperbottom who looks more like an everyman where his posture isn't great, and added elements of asymmetry to highlight his imperfections.
I'm never gonna be someone here. I want to be an inventor. I want to meet Bigweld. I want to be somebody.
Even with Cappy, they didn't find her final design until they looked at some of the female background characters they made and recycled parts of those in order to create the love interest. But the mechanical challenges didn't stop there. The team had to create a new feature onto CGI Studio where its algorithm could automatically determine where in the bodies of Rodney and the Rusties had the most wear to properly apply the rust and chip paintings onto them. Also, despite this being an animated movie that has eccentric characters like Fender, the animators had to put a limit onto their use of squash and stretch for the movements so that they could sell the illusion that the characters are made of metal.
Bum bum ba da bum bee. Bum bum ba da bum boom. Ba la 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 la.
When the team at Blue Sky finished their latest invention and released robots on March 11th, 2005, it wasn't a smash hit on the levels of Ice Age, but it still managed to do well for itself. Critics were not impressed by the writing and the story by calling it tiring and cliched, but the stunning animation and creative world building were enough to salvage the feature where they could find some things that they could enjoy. The same goes with the box office, where it had a good start with a $36 million opening weekend, which led to earning $128.2 million domestically and $262.5 million worldwide. It also received a nice bonus of being nominated for Best Character Design and Best Production Design at the Annie Awards, and got a short directed by Chris Gillian called Aunt Fanny's Tour of Booty, where Aunt Fanny gives a tour of Robot City, while some of the minor characters of the film find themselves in a series of slapstick hijinks as they try to stay behind her. While the idea of a sequel once floated around, but never went further than that, some people did express interest in having a proposed updated version of the film. On September 2nd, 2021, fans went to Twitter to spread the word about the hashtag #ReleaseTheChris_Wedge_Cut. While no actual director's cut of the film exists that we know of, the idea of such a cut came from the audio commentary of the film featuring Wedge and William Joyce, saying that some scenes would have played out differently in this alleged alternative version.
There's an alternate scene here that we'll see in the director's cut someday. There's 600,000 cuts of this sequence sitting around on edit machines at Blue Sky.
Yeah.
But a shot like this, I have about 3 or 4 more of these because it extended the kind of musical nature of it. There's a whole bunch of Cappy that got pulled just for she really took a hit, the character, for the length of the film.
I liked it better when he hit harder.
Yeah, that'll go back in the director's cut. When you see the director's cut, you'll understand Gunk a little better. You'll hate him more.
He was such a jerk in the early stuff.
While Robots may not have surpassed the achievements of its predecessor, it did expand upon the creative capabilities that Blue Sky Studios was able to accomplish. Just like Rodney Copperbottom in the film, the team was motivated to invent their way into developing new innovations in animation and bringing audiences to admirable new worlds, along with later gaining more admiration for fans who later realized that it's a commentary that speaks against capitalism. When it comes to both the movie itself and the production that went into making it, they greatly represent what Bigweld said best.
Whether a bot is made of new parts, old parts, or spare parts, you can shine no matter what you're made of.
But once they finished Robots, their next movie wasn't far behind, as they were also making their first sequel. However, when they went back to check up on their signature trio, the production was about to have a meltdown.
Ice Age 2, The Meltdown, coming 2006.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, then make sure you give this a like and subscribe so you don't miss out on the next parts to come. Now that the studio got their first taste of making animated movies, their next mission is to turn their big screen debut into a major franchise with not one, but 2 sequels for the rest of the decade, along with being the first to adapt a Dr. Seuss book into an animated feature. Animation Lookback is back, and I'm just getting started. So, until next time, see you later, dudes!